Hello out there, and thanks for clicking once again for our, towards the end of the week devotional here for Austinville Christian Reformed Church. It is a rainy Friday morning. It is a long week of sleep training for a little baby, and I'm not sure who's getting trained. If it's Addie who's being trained or Addie who's training us. Trying to convince us we don't need as much sleep as we think we need. And so we're getting around to it today. It's been in my head, and now it'll come out onto a digital format and be uploaded to the internet. And I guess apparently it is uploaded if you're already watching this. But a sleep-deprived me and a sleep-deprived household, we're pushing through. And maybe this is the trial that we are enduring for the sake of something. And I guess that's our hope, right? Is we have the hope and the promise of God that all we endure is for a purpose. It is for a reason, and eventually our purpose and reason is that the almost 2-year-old will finally sleep, and we will also. It's just a matter of how long is that going to take. So the prayers for perseverance, as James is teaching us to stick it out and to make it through. Let's see what else he has for us. Last week, we made it all the way through verse number 12. Verse number 12 of chapter number 1. And so today we are picking up in James chapter 1 once again. But we're all the way up to verse 13 now. So James chapter 1, beginning in the 13th verse. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. It's a bit of a stark warning here from James. Control yourself, which is sort of a theme that ends up stretching through the rest of the book of James, is how do we tame ourselves? How do we keep what is apparently innate in us? How do we keep that at bay? It's hard. Any of us that has encountered any sort of a temptation, from the extra scoop of ice cream to far worse things. We know that temptation is real. It is at times easy to overcome, and at times it is incredibly difficult. I think for most of us, wandering through a store and seeing things just sitting there and no one around watching, it's very easy to not just pick it up and put it in our pocket. That is a temptation that is not very real for us. Yet there are other things that are far more tempting. It's much more of a trial to endure those things. What do we do when we encounter those types of temptations, when those trials present themselves? What do we do? How do we approach them? Last week, James encouraged us by saying that blessed is the one who endures these things. Blessed is the one whose perseverance wins out. They will get the crown of life that God has promised to those whose faith carries them through, whose faith is enough, who believe enough in God to help carry us through. We don't rely on ourselves to make it through these things, but we rely on God to get us through these things. That we recognize our own weaknesses, we recognize our own failures and shortcomings, that it's God who carries us through. So verse 13, 14, and 15, that warning is for those of us whose faith we cast aside, who try to take matters into our own hands, or those of us who just plain don't want to resist. We want to give in because, well, sometimes those temptations, they're fun. We know that they're fun. those impulse items when you're going through the grocery store. You don't need them. There's a part of you that wants them, but do you really want them, or are they just shiny and fun and they're there? And so you grab that pack of cupcakes, or the little fun light up Lego keychain, or whatever it might be. It's fun and it seems harmless, and for the most part, those sorts of things are harmless. But there are times when it's not as harmless, or that the repercussions of those things are going to carry on through. And that's James' warning to us here. Be careful. Be careful of the things that you allow to take control of you. Be careful of the things that you allow to win out when we have those little internal battles in our heads of should I or shouldn't I. If we look at this beginning section of the chapter 1 from the book of James here, there is an element of training to it. There is an element of enduring and persevering and building up the ability to withstand more and more and more. By constantly giving in to the little battles and thinking, oh, it's okay, we're not allowing our maturity and our character to build to where we will be able to withstand those things that come later. It seems silly to ask God to give us the strength to persevere and not buy the sweet treats at the store, or to give us the wisdom and the knowledge to endure whatever thing may appear to be trivial. When it comes to salvation, nothing's trivial. There are no small issues. Our ability to withstand the little temptations helps build in us the ability to withstand those greater temptations. And James' warning is important to heed, because it's those greater temptations ultimately that lead to the greater sins in our lives that will ultimately lead to death. We contrast this with what we learned last week, that perseverance brings us life. A failure of our faith brings about death. That each and every little bit of sin in our lives that is allowed to grow, that is allowed to remain within us, eventually leads to something worse. Those little bits of spiritual death that take their toll over time, that eventually will lead to far greater repercussions, eternal repercussions. That when we suffer our physical deaths, there is an eternal death that will come. That failure of faith, the failure to believe in God and to believe in the work of Christ to help us carry on through these hard times. The temptations are there. They're always there. They always come in various forms. How we approach them, how we look at them, the severity, the seriousness that we address various temptations in our lives, those matter. They cannot be allowed to grow. But the biggest takeaway, I think, that we have here from James is there's a bit of a theodicy here, that is that origin of evil, and that James isn't laying out anything too overly complex or detailed, but he's simply saying that don't blame God. It's not God who's causing this evil. It's not God who is tempting you. It's not God who is trying to tear you down. That wouldn't make any sense. Why would God be working against his own people? Why would God be working against those that he's trying to save? Don't blame God. Don't say, oh, God's fault that these things are happening in my life. These trials and these temptations, the testing comes as a result of life. And if we want to blame anyone, if we look at that word of tempting, the tempter, that's the enemy. That's the devil. But as I've also said before, we don't need a whole lot of help when it comes to doing bad things. The devil doesn't need to work too hard to tempt us. That within our own human natures, we want to we want to do the things that we're not supposed to do. We want that extra slice of pizza. We want things that don't seem to be that big of a deal. But once again, it's the habits and the patterns that we need to be developing in our lives to withstand and endure the things that come later on. But verse 14 is the kicker. Each of us, to paraphrase a little bit, that each of us, we're the ones who are tempted because it's our own desire. We're tempted because we want to be. We give in to temptation because we want to give in. It's our own evil desires that lead us to failure. It's our own evil desires that lead us to sin. It's our own evil desires that lead to death. We don't need any help. That when we fail, it's our own fault. That when we don't do the thing that we know we ought to do, it's our own fault. It's no one else's fault but our own. We love to say, the devil made me do it. Nah, he just gave you the opportunity. You chose to do it. There's a choice. As we talked about on Sunday, that choice between life and death. Is it preparation for the future, or is it a failure? How do we approach the trials and the hard times that come? It's a choice between giving in to desire or falling to our knees and asking God to help us, recognizing when we fail, when we fall short, that it's not up to us, that God is there to help carry us through. It's a matter of faith. Do we believe that God can carry us through? Do we believe that God will carry us through? That if we're facing these trials and temptations for our own good, then God will indeed help us. But we have to submit to Him. We have to humble ourselves, recognize our failures and shortcomings. God, help me through this. Jesus, help me through this. Your death upon the cross is what makes it possible for me to endure if I but trust in you. If my faith is strong enough to cling to you. And that's what it comes down to, is do we choose to simply give in and give up, or do we choose faith? Do we choose to allow God to do what God is going to do, to let go of our own sense of control, that desire to be in control of everything? Surrender and allow God to do what God is going to do. He will carry us through if we let Him. But we have to stop fighting against Him. Because the alternative to life is not a pleasant alternative. James warns us not to let even the littlest of things go. Turn everything over to God. Surrender those desires that we have. Change our hearts. Allow God to change our hearts so that what we desire is not an evil desire, but it's God's will that we desire. Aligning ourselves with His. That's the journey of faith. Transformed more and more into who God wants us to be. Transformed more and more into the image of Christ. Choosing life over death. So let us join together in a time of prayer now as we ask God, as we surrender ourselves to Him, and look forward to the life that He has promised us, the life that He will give if we simply believe He can and will. Father in heaven, an encouraging word from James today, and a warning at the same time. we recognize in our lives that there are moments when we do not live up to the standards that we really ought to live up to. That we don't do the things we know we should do. We for whatever reason, we're not able to trust in you. We're not able to believe that you're capable of carrying us through, or we simply just don't want you to. Sometimes doing that thing we know we ought not to do is, well, it's fun and it's enjoyable, but it is a broken form of joy. It is a broken form of pleasure. It is sinful, and it's hard to resist. But we can resist with your help. If we surrender our desires to you, if we humble ourselves, if we surrender all of who we are and allow you to work in the way that you are already working, the way you desire to work in our lives, that's when change can and will come. But it's up to us to allow you access to the parts of our lives that we try to hide. Help us to realize there are no things that we can hide from you. There is no part of us that is not under your control. And any control we feel we have is just an illusion. It's just us fooling ourselves. Ultimately, your will is what will be done, and it can be painful, or we can surrender freely and watch how you work and be amazed by the way that you work. Help us to choose life over death. Help us to endure. Help us to persevere. Help us to pass these tests and these trials that you bring into our lives, that you allow to come into our lives. Help us to recognize once again that it is for our own good. Thank you for loving us. For ultimately, that is what it comes down to. It is your love for us that grows us and stretches us. You don't leave us as we are. But you want us to be better. You want better and greater things for your children. Give us hearts to embrace it. Strengthen our will to do what must be done. To partner with you. To allow your Spirit to move in us. To be a bit more like Jesus each and every day. We lift up those in our community today, Lord. Those in our world whose trials are great. Trials have been ongoing. For those whose trials are just beginning. Give them the strength and the endurance to carry through. Give them the faith necessary to believe in you and to rely on you, that you will see them through these times. Whether it be an illness such as this virus, physical ailments, surgery, recovering from operations, from injuries, spiritual illness, mental illness, financial troubles. There are trials of so many kinds, Lord, that we are called to endure each and every day, all of us. Remind us that, once again, it is only through you and your strength and your provision that we will make it through these things. It is not through any working of our own. It is not through any inherent strength that we might possess. But it is only through the strength that you have given us, the strength that you have grown in us through these trials. Help us to carry through when more, bigger, newer trials come. But we give you thanks, for we know that the work you are accomplishing is for our own good, and that we will come through these stronger, better able to help those alongside of us, to walk with them through their trials, that our strength can become their strength, that your whole body is strengthened through this, and that together, all of us will make it through. But it is only together and with your help that we can and will endure. We give you thanks for the trials that we have passed through, for the storms that we have weathered, for the blessings that you have brought through those times. For they are what gives us hope. Knowing how you have worked gives us hope for how you will continue to work. And even in the hardest of times, you have never abandoned us and left us on our own. And you will not do that now. You will not do that in the future. Continue to strengthen our faith, that we believe and trust in you, that you are always with us. We have hope in your promises that you always keep. And help us. Help us to use our new strength to change this world, to change the lives of those around us, to make someone's life just even a little bit better. Knowing that you can work through the smallest of things to make big changes, to impact the lives of so many through just one person. Give us the courage to share our stories. Give us the courage to share your gospel truth. Give us the strength and the courage to love all of our neighbors. We thank you for loving us so much that your love pours forth from us. Help us to never hold on to any of that for ourselves, but to continually pour it out, for you are an endless source of love. We will never run dry of our own love, because it all comes from you. Keep us ever mindful of that truth. Help us to see your will. Help us to do your will. Help us to accept it when it comes. That is our prayer of faith. Wholly trusting in you and you alone. For your glory, for your honor, and for the benefit of your kingdom. All this we pray. Amen.